before I get started, raise your hand for me if you've seen this in real life. Somebody tell me what it is. Okay, it's a jewel. Seen anything that looks kind of like this? Okay. How about this one? Anybody seen anything like this? Okay. Devices like this? Lots of hands. And how about these? Even more hands. Okay, so I know this is in your world. I know you guys are seeing these in real life. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Why do I talk to kids about vaping? Because we know that the majority, about 80% of adults who started smoking, started before they were 18. So if we can get you to 18 years old and never smoke and never vape, the odds say you never will. Okay? That's why we talk to you when you're young. So we're going to do a little quiz all together. Nicotine is it a drug? Is it not even in vapes? Is it not addictive if you just use a little bit? Everybody, what do you think? Okay, that is right. Nicotine is a drug. How about the second one? How addictive is it? It's not addictive only if you use a whole lot, or it's extremely addictive. Okay, that is correct. Nicotine is extremely addictive. How about number 3? Who's most at risk for addiction to nicotine? Is it young people, middle-aged adults, or older folks? Okay, again, this is why I talk to your age group. And then the last one, I have to use it every single day to get addicted. Okay, sounds like we're kind of split there, but the correct answer is false. Okay, I don't have to be a daily user to become addicted to nicotine. So let's talk a little bit about nicotine. Okay, we know that nicotine is a drug. Okay, the type of drug that it is called a stimulant. Comes from that word stimulate. If something stimulates you, what does it do? Pumps you up, revs you up, okay? But what stimulants also do is they take those blood vessels and they make them really small. So if my blood vessels are really small, what does that do to how my heart works? Makes it work a lot harder, doesn't it? If it's got to pump that blood through little bitty blood vessels, makes it really hard on my heart. Okay, we learned in the quiz that nicotine's very addictive. We can say that nicotine is one of the most addictive drugs that exists. They rank it up there with heroin for how addictive that it is. And then the point about brain, it actually changes how your brain functions. And we're going to look at how that happens in just a second. And the only place in the world that nicotine comes from is where? Tobacco. Okay? So we're going to get a little bit of science today along with our health lesson. So where does it come from? Where do we find it? We said it comes from the leaf of the tobacco plant. Okay? Only place in the world that nicotine is derived from. We know that it's found in cigarettes. And actually the tobacco companies can manipulate the amount of nicotine that's in cigarettes. So they can make it higher if they want to. E-juice, okay? Just about every e-juice that's out there has some amount of nicotine in it. So, here comes our science portion of the lesson. How does it affect the brain? You see that little yellow lit up center there in the brain? That's the pleasure center of our brain. That's where it tells us that something feels good. So when we inhale that nicotine, that's where it goes, to that pleasure center of the brain. And what it does, all those little things that look like stars, those are those pleasure receptors. And nicotine sticks to those pleasure receptors. So when I inhale that nicotine through my lungs and it hits my brain says, this feels really good. Okay, so now it's affected my entire brain. So that sounds like a good thing, right? I'm doing something that makes my brain feel good. But what starts to happen is it starts to mess with our brain's ability to feel good. If we're getting that from an artificial place, is that going to confuse our brain? Okay? And that's what happens. Our brain doesn't want to make its own feel-good chemicals anymore. It wants you to give it that nicotine to artificially give you that feel-good, you know, that sense of, oh, this feels good. So gradually what happens is I keep getting this feel-good chemical from an artificial source. My brain thinks it needs it to feel normal now. So not only am I not getting this makes me feel good, it turns into I have to have this just to feel normal. So that's what this looks like. Okay? So even though I know all the harmful things that it's doing to my body, I have to give it to my brain now just to function. So we're going to look at that in a different way. So I take in the nicotine. In this case, it's from an e-cigarette. It hits that pleasure center of my brain. My brain says, oh, this is awesome. But it's going to eventually wear off. So that feeling of this feels really good is going to go away. So what am I going to have to do to get that feel good back? I'm going to have to smoke again, or I'm going to have to vape again. So do you guys see how that's a vicious cycle of I have to keep feeding that feeling so that I don't feel bad? So that's kind of how nicotine affects our brain. But how does it affect the rest of our body? Well, we talked about how it affects our heart. Because it's a stimulant, it affects those blood vessels, which makes my heart beat a lot harder. It's working a lot harder now. It affects my lungs. We're literally doing damage to our lungs if we smoke or we vape. This is one you might not think about. It affects my digestive system. Nicotine is causing my stomach to produce acid. So now I might be dealing with acid reflux. Another one you might not think about is if you're diabetic, it affects your ability to process insulin. And another body system that it affects, who wants to be a parent someday down the road? I was going to say there's only one kid in the room that wants to have kids someday. If you want to have kids someday, it does damage to our reproductive system too. So it's not just our brain we're talking about when we're talking about nicotine addiction, but it affects a lot of other body systems.